What do you do when somebody comes forward who is credible, is in the right position, has taken the right measures, that drops information that essentially confirms the extraterrestrial presence? When the truth embargo ends and the president comes forward, one of the first questions is going to be asked in those briefing rooms is, when did you first know about the ET presence? And it's going to be 1940s. I am certain that President Biden knows there's an ET presence. 100% certain of that.
We are joined today by the one and only Mr. Stephen Bassett. Steve is a political activist, disclosure advocate, and the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, otherwise known as PRG, founded in 1996 to end a government-imposed embargo on the truth behind extraterrestrial-related phenomena. He has lectured to audiences around the world and given nearly 2,000 radio, television, and podcast interviews about the implications of disclosure, which is the formal confirmation by heads of state of an extraterrestrial presence engaging in the human race. His advocacy work has been extensively covered by national and international media, including being featured on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, The Washington Post, and The New York Times. In 2013, Steve's organization conducted a citizens' hearing on disclosure at the National Press Club in Washington. Steve's organization recently launched an activist project, Shiftstorm, very clever name, seeking UAP hearings as soon as possible before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And with all of that, he has found time to join us today. So, Steve, we really appreciate you being here with us, and welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, so Steve, let's get right to it. You are truly boots on the ground there in Washington, D.C., as it relates to firsthand intel on what the Senate Intel committees are willing to admit that they know about disclosure of extraterrestrial races on our planet. So what can you tell us about that? And are there any new updates that you can share with us?
Oh, there's much going on. I'm thinking of me more as secondhand intel. They have relationships with people that are engaging many on the Hill directly. Nevertheless, it is a pleasure to be in D.C. at this time and able to be close to what is, I think, I've always said, is the most profound event in human history is about to take place. That said, the situation has gotten even more complicated, which is hard to imagine. In 2013, anticipating having a pretty good idea of what I felt Senator Hillary Clinton was going to do if she became president, because of the history of her and her husband and their number one closest advisor, John Podesta, regarding this issue going all the way back to 1993 and what came to be called the Rockefeller Initiative. They tried to engage the issue, and it didn't work, primarily because the Department of Defense, the Air Force, and everybody else was not going to cooperate with the president, because, well, he's just the president, and they are, endless fixtures in town defending us against all enemies, domestic and foreign. And presidents, for them, can somewhat be an inconvenience, and so it didn't work. However, they got a taste. They got enough information at that time to know this is real. Then the question is, what do you do? You are in your second term. He might have taken some action in the second term after everything was blocked. But another scandal developed which really pinned him down. And so this issue moved forward in 2000 to the next administration. Meanwhile, the Clintons left, but Hillary Clinton's desire to be president never left. And so she went on to obviously have substantial positions, including senator. So we knew she's going to run for office again. And so the plan was to hold a mock congressional hearing in Washington, because the funding did become available to do this. I wanted to do it for about 10 years and show Washington, D.C. what a hearing would look like. They hadn't had one since 1968, and it was really not much of a hearing at all. It was just a half a day Some people came in, made some statements. There were no what we'll call hard witnesses. It was mostly for show because they were in the process of closing everything down and trying to get out from under the issue completely, which is what happened in 1969. So there hadn't been one since 1968. And so, okay, let's see what it would look like. So we brought in 42 witnesses, 10 countries, paid 6 former members of Congress a rather substantial amount of money to sit and listen to this testimony and ask questions for a full week, 30 hours. The entire thing was filmed so that it would be a full record, and it was also live streamed. The plan was then to deliver that full 30 hours to every single member of Congress, which happened. The full set of DVDs, all 30 hours, was delivered to every single member of Congress. Very late 2014. And then as 2015 began and the campaign began for the presidential election, I then worked with a publicist here in DC to do one thing: generate as many articles in the media across the board, New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Examiner, Washington Times, magazines, the works, which put the truth or the reality of the connection between the presumptive candidate for president, almost certainly to be nominated and considered to be pretty much a lock to win, and the connection between that candidate, her husband, and their chief advisor, John Podesta, and the ET issue, so that it would be interjected into the campaign in a nonpartisan way. We're simply reporting and talking about what happened back in 93 to 96. And it happened. We generated 400 articles. So much press pressure was put on them that while they didn't want to do this, they had to speak to it. And they gave interviews. President Clinton gave an interview on one of the talk shows. She did the same thing a couple of times. Even Barack Obama got involved. John Podesta gave some interviews. And so the issue and the connection with this presumptive next president was made clear worldwide, 400 articles. And so that was the plan, and it was moving forward quite nicely. Unfortunately, things took an interesting turn, and she did not win that election. And as a result, she shut down. That was 2016 when it shut down. And then something happened. And that, of course, was the To the Stars Academy was launched in October of 2017, followed very quickly by extraordinary stories in the New York Times. And off we go again. Okay, off we go again. So what has happened is that in that 7 years, from December of 2017 until now, more progress has been made to end the truth embargo and get confirmation from our president that we're not alone, and get formal understanding of what that means. I have a pretty good idea what that means, but until we get confirmation, every speculation is in play. They're from here, they're from there, they're from the future, they're from the past, they live in the inner earth, they're transdimensional, this, that, and everything else. I get it. But until we get confirmation and hard information, that's all speculation. However, the clear favorite, the most likely explanation, fundamental explanation, still remains that they are star-to-star beings who have come here in the past, in various times, maybe not been around for a while, but in the modern era, they escalated their engagement right after the events in Japan when we dropped the bombs. And we're now in a 77 year of intense engagement by these entities. Since 2017, more has happened than in the previous 70. We're in an unprecedented place. The truth embargo is essentially collapsing, setting the stage for this event, disclosure. But not surprisingly, and I always knew this, that as we get closer and closer to the actual event, the confirmation event, it was going to get more complicated. The resistance was going to increase. My role is to try to understand as much as possible of what's going on and then communicate that to the media, who in many cases don't know much and are still suffering from the huge stigma and ridicule heaped on this issue by the government intentionally, and other coercions that have kept institutions out of the issue, and try to communicate to them and to the general public what is happening, because what is happening is very complicated and yet incredibly important, more so with every passing year. If you had talked to me when I first entered this field 28 years ago, or maybe even 2000, when things started to really get going and an activist movement started coming together, I would not have thought that the disclosure event, as we neared the finish line, would be dealing with or part of a set of issues and problems, both domestic and foreign, that we are facing now. I just couldn't have imagined it. And so as we've moved towards the situation where our president could confirm the extraterrestrial presence, this is unprecedented, but not disconnected from the ET issue. And let me go there. The truth embargo, 77 years on, is essentially nothing more than we know something and we're not going to let you know. And that's the way it is. And also, it's so important that we're going to interfere with your ability to try to learn it on your own. And we'll prevent institutions that you rely on to provide information. We're going to kind of coerce them not to go along. And that's basically what it is. It's just that the issue that is being suppressed, embargoed, is the most profound issue in the history of the human race in terms of the context of the modern era. It was, I think, contact and engagement was happening thousands of years ago. Fine, that's not where we are now. The circumstances politically are really making this difficult. And one of the reasons we're in this political difficulty is because this pernicious and persistent lie that is now 77 years on, which the government has pursued with enormous vigor and intensity and spent a ton of money on, has been a major contributor to the collapse of trust in the United States government by the American people. The government didn't take into account that. I think when they embargoed this for national security reasons back in the late 40s and solidified it in 1953, and then pursued this and justified it year after year based upon the threat of nuclear war, they were not factoring in the effect that that's going to have on people who are expecting you to keep them informed of major issues and so forth. They're not going to go, well, I know you're just protecting us from evil aliens or whatever the hell. Do whatever you want. And as that secrecy was so successfully conducted, they became ever emboldened. If you can classify, hide, embargo a phenomena, an issue that's literally present everywhere, that it's occurring all around the world, people are seeing it, reporting it, and researching. If you can do that, then you can classify anything. You can get away with any level of secrecy, and they did. And as the whole secret empire, as I called it, grew and grew and grew, people became ever more distrustful. You end up with the situation we're in now. I never thought we would be there. And so in that arena, we have been trying to push the process of disclosure forward and having success, extraordinary success. And yet we haven't closed the deal. It was my hope that we would get disclosure before this election. In the 4 years of the previous president's term, a great deal was happening, advancing this issue. As we move into the current president's term, things really pick up and get intense. A lot of extraordinary things happened, but by and large, it was bipartisan. In other words, the issue is as nonpartisan as any issue the human race has ever dealt with. And nonpartisan doesn't mean it'll be dealt with in a bipartisan way. Bipartisan means two partisan entities who are in opposition work together to address the issue. So it's a bipartisan engagement of a nonpartisan issue. This is what it always had to be. I knew that we needed to get it resolved before the campaign was significantly underway. And that is, some might say, well, wait a minute. if it's going to get resolved and we're going to get disclosure, then the disclosure president, and that's what disclosure is, capital D, it comes from the president. Everybody else, anybody that doesn't count. I don't care who the hell says that there's ETs here, and plenty of people are saying it, right? People of high rank and station are saying, doesn't matter. Until it comes from the president, we do not get into the post-disclosure world. In order to complete the deal and set disclosure up, which is what this has all been about for the last 7 years, is that in order to do it, you have to have a major hearing in front of the world's people with absolute solid witnesses, given answering very clear and nonpartisan questions and putting the truth out there for all to see. Through the effort of a lot of good people and legislation that was passed, the circumstances were set up where witnesses could start coming forward privately behind the scenes by the dozens. Some of them went public a little bit, some of them got known, but overall, the vast majority of the witnesses who had worked in the military or worked in government, some still active, many retired, who had firsthand confirmation evidence and engagement of this extraterrestrial non-human intelligence, were coming forward by the dozens, and they were being interviewed. And therefore, the basis for that hearing was there. They could have held it months ago. It means that the disclosure issue and resolution is now moved forward into this campaign. And that means a couple of things. It could become a hyper-partisan issue. That is not a good thing. Secondly, the closer we get to that, the ability to make that hearing and call that hearing is just going to fade away, in which case we're not going to see that hearing until after the election. And so for me, getting this hearing and getting disclosure in a nonpartisan way from a president who happened to be a Democrat was absolutely critical to us having a decent chance to having a situation in 2025 where the United States and the world could move forward in extraordinary ways in an extraordinary new world after an extraordinary paradigm shift. And I'm seeing that opportunity virtually evaporate. And so I am very, very concerned. And that is kind of where we are. I'm happy to go into some of the details and the granular stuff.
You're talking in your last podcast that there's this little moment in Independence Day where the president, they start talking about Area 51. And he's like, oh, that's just nothing. And the Secretary of Defense says, well, not exactly.
Not exactly right.
Right.
Sure.
And what are your thoughts on how that pertains to the real world?
I didn't feel this way in the early days when I got into this field. As of now, I am pretty much convinced that every single president has known about this since Truman. Every single one. Presidents have plenty of power. People want to say they're puppets and this and that, and they're controlled, what have you. There's always influence on the presidency. And it does have certain limitations constitutionally. It's not necessary for a president to have an entire CIA team come in there and give them a 5-hour briefing with videos and everything else about the whole ET thing for them to know. No, they don't have to have that, and probably couldn't get it if they wanted to. But is somebody going to let them know this? Is somebody close to them? And they have a whole lot of people that are close to them that are working for the White House, working for the president. They have connections from years in government with people in the military intelligence community. The idea that no one is going to tip them off, that yes, this is real. These entities are not from here, or they are not human. And we even have vehicles. The idea that that's not going to happen is basically absurd. What they choose to do about it is another matter. And what often happens is they make a statement or they maybe try something. Every administration, almost every administration, you get a glimpse, but some have been quite good at simply staying away from it entirely. So every single one has known. And so in the movie, the president would have known. And what's cool about that scene that I've talked about is that over at the Pentagon, read the whole script. And they came apart in the script when they're talking about that crash vehicle from Roswell was at Area 51. And one way or another, the producers were told, we're not going to cooperate with you any further if you don't take that out of the script. And things were far enough along at that point, I think, thanks to the work of huge numbers of my colleagues and researchers now past, that the producers of that film basically said, okay, we'll do it without you. And they did. So that's kind of what's cool about that moment. The president could have come forward at any time. Again, I am certain that President Biden knows there's an ET presence. 100% certain of that. And so he could have come forward at any time. He could have done it the first day he was in office. He could have done it the first month. But if he had done that without any of the other developments and processes that have gone on, it would have been completely partisan. It would have been viewed as this president trying to use that issue, which has been withheld for all these years, but he's going to stick it out there right now because he felt that would help him, quote, and his party win the House, win the Senate. But the way it had to be done was all of this other preparation had to take place, which brings me to the most important thing that I'm going to say. Not a single person that I know of on any of those networks or in any article in those papers has said this. And it's interesting. I don't fully understand it. I would like to get an explanation someday. And what is it that I'm referring to? It's so simple. Starting in 2017, with the people coming forward in the To the Stars Academy and all those 10 people in the New York Times article, and then a whole lot of podcasts being where people like Luis Elizondo were talking about this issue and bringing it up, getting the social media excited, building a whole social media platform with hooks like UFO Twitter and so forth. Plus the behind the scenes bringing of witnesses to the Washington, D.C. To be privately meeting with members of Congress to sort of getting them informed so they could take action. The creation of the legislation, the creation of formal entities like the UAP Task Force, and then eventually a couple of other iterations ending up at Arrow. All of this, 7 years, has absolutely nothing to do with the United States government realizing, my God, we need to understand what's going on here, which is very confusing to a lot of people who know something about this issue when they're watching this and going, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? What the hell? This whole thing has been about a simple problem that the United States government has been putting off for a very long time. What do we do the day after a head of state confirms that this is extraterrestrial, non-human, and we have non-human tech and bodies? What do we do the day after? The problem the government's had is, how do we get ready for that? How do we prepare in advance for that day? Which, by the way, could have come at any time. And so they needed to prepare so that it would be orderly. And so when the day after disclosure, they got legislation that addresses the demands of the American people. They have an entity set up to deal with information flow and speak for the government. They have an informed Congress, right, and so forth. It's all orderly, it's all appropriate, and therefore they can move forward in a proper way. But they had a problem. How do you prepare for disclosure without disclosing? Right? You can't go to the public and say, look, we need to pass some legislation here. Yeah, we need some legislation and a report from Congress on this because, there's extraterrestrials here and we need to know about it, right? We need a report about it. You can't do that. That's disclosure. We need to set up an organization. NASA should probably do a study. They can't say, well, the reason we need to get NASA involved is because there's extraterrestrials here. And NASA obviously is very much important in that. And by the way, NASA's known about the ET presence from the get-go. And by that, I mean people that had a need to know and NASA knew, right? They couldn't say that. And so they had to couch it in this idea that there is a phenomena. It does have national security concerns, a potential threat, not a threat. Clearly, there seems to be some evidence, and we need to start doing these things so we can find out more about that and then get back to you. And it's a ruse. It's a lie. It's a game, but it is a necessary lie, a necessary game. And that is the situation that I have been addressing and trying to get a point. The United States government has been lying to the American people about a lot of things over these decades, including things that have gotten us into wars that have caused the lives of lots of people based upon not the truth, but misrepresentation. This is awful, awful stuff. But those lies had short-term duration. In other words, we lied about this, we go into a war, a lot of people die, war ends, move on. And there have been other lies like that. This lie is systemic. They have had to lie about this issue since the day the press release went out in Roswell in July of 1947. And they have been lying every single day since then. It is a constant maintained misrepresentation, a fundamental departure from truth that literally has infected the body politic. And so it is a really big lie. And obviously dealing with that history is going to be complicated, but it's not unresolvable. But still, it is a massive lie. And in order to end that lie, they have to do another lie. And yet I understand, and I think most people would understand, why they've had to do it that way, to prepare for the extraordinary event and what follows. We understand, we get why you're having to do it that way, and we accept it. As long as it gets to disclosure, it gets to the truth, and gets to us finding out what you know about this phenomena, what you know about vehicles, what technology you have, and start getting that all out. When the truth embargo ends and the president comes forward, one of the first questions is going to be asked in those briefing rooms is, when did you first know about the ET presence? And it's going to be 1947. It might even be 1936. When did you first have crash vehicles? 1947. I'm trying to get that message out. Folks, the government has known about this phenomena and been dealing with it for a minimum of 77 years. What they're trying to do now, and it's self-serving, is to create a situation where disclosure can happen. You will be less upset, and you will be more understanding and be able to give them a little more slack, file a lot less lawsuits, and so we can all move forward in the post-disclosure world to set things right here before we completely destroy the whole enchilada. That is the point that I have made now, and I won't have to make it again.
Well, I think you did a great job explaining that, so I appreciate that very much. And I have a lot of questions for you.
Fire.
Okay. So I agree with you. First of all, disclosure is long overdue. And I don't think they're actually going to acknowledge the year that they knew of an ET presence. I'm sure they're going to, keep that under wraps, or at least not be honest about it. There's no reason to believe they will be. But regardless, we all know the truth, right? And it's just a matter of getting the truth out there for other people to be aware of that. And I do agree that preparation is absolutely necessary. I have to believe they are doing that right now. It's already been in place for a very long time, just in case something does happen where the ETs decide to show themselves prior to us deciding that we wanted to bring this information out. So we don't know what that looks like, obviously. But here's my question. We're coming up on a year now since David Grusch came out with his testimony, right? And why have we not used him coming forward in his congressional hearing to discuss what he knows as the leading edge of disclosure? That was a perfect opportunity for them to start slowly leaking out following that. Oh, okay, wow, this is true information. And by the way, here's a little more, here's a little more, here's a little more, so that people can slowly open up to it, because that was an eye-opening moment for a lot of people. It wasn't for some of us that already know the truth, but for some people, it was a moment that they needed to hear because it was coming directly from the government. They could have used that as an opportunity. That could have been the catalyst to continue to share that information slowly in a controlled way, so that when the time comes, it is less of a shock to people and we don't have the chaos that we all expect might happen when the information does come out. Why would they not choose to use that as that leading edge of disclosure?
First of all, it wasn't supposed to happen. The process, which was unfolding, which was moving forward in a pretty orderly way, did not take into account David Grusch. There have been people out there that have said this and said that. And there have been various witnesses here, and we've had press conferences, and the nuclear witnesses, the nuclear tampering witnesses have come forward. But Grusch was different. One, he was working for the UAP task force. His job was to engage the issue. He's getting information from classified sources, and he confirms that information through other classified sources. So it's secondhand, but it's not exactly a trivial secondhand. I mean, this is serious secondhand information. And then he begins to do what he thinks is his job, and he's providing that information, I think, initially to the Senate Intel staff. He ran into the point that I just made a few minutes ago, is that all of this is not being done to find out what the phenomena is. The government already knows. The DOD, of course, being the heart of that knowledge, and the heart of that knowledge being the deeply classified USAPs, where it's all been parked forever. He may or may not have gotten that, but the point is that the process is setting up for disclosure, not to disclosure. And so he may not have understood that. So when he goes forward with what amounts to be really challenging information, he starts coming under attack, because there are people within the Department of Defense, who we don't know, but we can assume that they're not trivial people. These are people of substance, maybe some appointees, but could be standard serving members of the military and or civilian corps who do not want disclosure, ever. They don't want to see it in their lifetime. They don't think we have a right to know it, and need to know it, and so forth. And they are going to pretty much oppose it to the very end. But so when he comes forward, he started getting attacked. He was a man who served 2 terms in Iraq, made great sacrifices for his country, probably pretty proud of his service, and he wasn't happy about it. And so essentially he sought protection and redress by, again, going through channels to the Inspector General. And he got that redress because he had a legitimate case. The information was legitimate. So in a sense, they validated him, and then they gave him what redress they could. And he goes back to his job at the UAP task force. But the harassment does not completely stop. In fact, it gets worse. But then once he does that and goes to the Intel committee, those that are really serious about that, they move to the death threat level. And so now he's getting death threats. Now he's really angry. And so he decides to do something that nobody that I'm aware of has done, frankly, in that context. I mean, Corso, a little bit. There's a few people that maybe fall in this genre, but I think what he did was unique. He says, I'm coming forward as a whistleblower. He's really not a whistleblower, but I can understand why he may have said that, why others have attached it. He's basically a witness who's come forward with information. But he has alluded to the fact that he thinks, I think I have heard him say this, that the policy of truth embargo is not legal. And if that statement alone kind of puts him in the whistleblower category, he comes forward out of nowhere for the general public. Almost, I know no one in the field that expected it. And when it broke on June the 5th, this just dropped into the whole process. A black swan event, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't in the script. It wasn't supposed to happen. And it completely changed, in many ways, the disclosure process that was underway. It created huge problems for everybody. The Congress, the Senate, the DOD, and the White House. What do you do when somebody comes forward who is credible, is in the right position, has taken the right measures, that drops information that essentially confirms the extraterrestrial presence? Because they can't use that word, and because there are some alternative possible explanations, time travel and what have you. But the extraterrestrial term is somewhat corrupted, like UFO is corrupted, which is why we use UAP as much as we do. So what do you do? That is the reason why they didn't just jump on David Grusch and let him be the point person that's going to take them home. He is not a point person. He is someone that is doing his job, working for the government, had information and brought it forward. He's not the only one that has done it, has come forward, but he's the one that had the most impact because of the timing and who he was. that did not change the fact that the vehicle that delivers the platform to the president to be able to end this lie, this 77-year lie, is the Senate Intelligence Committee and the hearing that they must hold, the one that will be watched by millions of people. And so what you saw, as this story will eventually be told, is how the U.S. government reacted to David Grusch. The Defense Department, I'm sure, was having a lot of meetings, and they were deciding, what do we do about David Grusch? What do we do? What do we do? And they're following everything. And one of the things they would have seen is that after Grusch comes forward, the media explodes. Hundreds of, well, many hundreds, maybe 100, 200 articles are published within a short amount of time. The next congressional response takes place, and this is huge. Chuck Schumer delivered what amounted to the fundamental response of the United States Senate on this issue, or the Senate Intelligence Committee. And it was as big as Grusch's impact. It was off the charts. He is about to put up on the website, I think it went up on the 27th, the legislative website for the Senate, the UAP Disclosure Act, which contained the UAP Control Disclosure Plan. And what the act was the full process in which everything the U.S. government has known, does know, all the research, all the files, all the documents, everything that's classified. And there's a lot that's out public. There's a lot of files that have been put out public. People don't even know that actually kind of refer to all of this and confirm it. But, you know, they're just out there. People don't look at them. Bring it all out in a process that ultimately puts it all in the public domain. Now, that plus Grusch really made it clear to the Defense Department and any individuals within the military intelligence complex that this is real now. We're headed for disclosure. A couple of things happened, which they'll have to answer for. One, they launched a full-fledged lobbyist-driven effort to gut the powers from the bill, to strip them out, knowing full well it would be obvious to everybody that we would know exactly what they were doing and why they were doing it, but they had no choice. They had to sort of out themselves. Yeah, this is where the stuff is, and yeah, we've got it, and yeah, we plan to make a lot of money on it, and you ain't taking that away from us, and so we're going to gut that bill. And they did. The next thing that happened is Schumer responded by going on the Senate floor and basically saying, we're not done with this yet. We're disappointed, but we're going to get this done. And that really shook them up. They're going, he's not going to lie down on this? You mean they're going to come back at us again? I mean, you can reintroduce bills over and over if you want to. And so the next response that the Department of Defense did, which they're going to regret, it's not going to go well for them, is they made the decision that we're going to try to pull off in 2024 what we did in 1969, when Blue Book was causing too much attention and the issue was getting more and more publicity and people were paying more and more attention to it. And there had already been like 2 hearings, even though they were kind of show. We got to shut it all down. And so, to the disgrace of the University of Colorado, they got a professor there to essentially shepherd and sign off on a report that was completely bogus, saying there's nothing to this, it's okay, there's no there. They used that to shut down Project Blue Book. Then they went after and destroyed NICAP, which is a very significant organization, had to go, and pretty much felt that they were free. They were cool. They would be fine for, who knows, decades maybe. They did it in 1969. They decided to try it again in 2024. One of the stupidest things the United States Defense Department has ever done. Some of the wars they've engaged in under false pretenses were not stupid, they were heinous, but this is just pure stupidity. And so essentially, they convinced Dr. Kirkpatrick to be the Edward Condon of 2024, to sign off on a study that they quickly finished up on that was completely false. They're not lying now to get the disclosure. They're lying to hold it off, and they published the Arrow study report. That's their response. It has been eviscerated on the internet. The media stood back for a while and went, ooh, let's think about this. You know, the major media, and then they're coming back, all right, and more things are happening. That was the response. So that gives you a picture of why they just couldn't take David Grusch and run. This thing is much more complicated, much more significant. It has to be done in a way that will be responsible and not destructive. And unless one has a large enough picture of how government works and all of the players involved and all the interests that are being affected, it's easy to go, why don't we just do it? And why does this person do it? No, this is the most profound event in human history. And therefore, it requires, by necessity, that it be done in a way that is going to be as constructive as possible, because to blow it, to get it wrong, could be catastrophic. And so that's my answer to your question, but also I wanted to fill out that part because I hadn't talked about it.
Well, I'm going to coin a new phrase here, and it's going to be disclosure fatigue, because I think all of us who already know the truth are ready for this information. We want it to come out. We're asking for it to come out. And I would say 8 out of 10 people probably do understand that we are not the only beings in this universe. I think it's actually pathetic to think that there's just us. It's very arrogant to believe that. So for me, I'm actually going to change the word also from disclosure to confirmation, because again, they're not disclosing anything. We all know the truth already. It's just a confirmation. And really, it's just a formality in some cases for most of us. But when it comes to the formality, and here's one other question for you. Why is it that it seems like the USA is the ones that have to do this? It seems like whoever comes forward with this information officially, another country say, that gives them power. So what is holding other countries back from coming forward with this? It seems they're all standing, on the edge of this, looking to the USA to say, hey, are you ready? Are you ready to finally put it out there? Are you, once you do that, we're already behind you. But why is no one else coming forward with this first?
First of all, you're right. It's formal confirmation from the president is what it is. The disclosure, the small d disclosure, has been going on since 1947 when they put out the press release. It's been a stream of small d disclosure going on that has just filled up libraries and filled up files and so forth, but it hasn't brought about confirmation. Capital D disclosure is a different matter. So I get that. It's a little too late for me to go out and start promoting confirmation with a capital C. So it's still going to be capital D disclosure. But I'm happy to explain.
I'll allow it. I'll still allow the disclosure word. It's
now, one of the questions I'm asked is, why is the U.S. seem to be the country that supposedly is going to resolve this issue? Why have the other countries stood down on this? It's impossible to know the details are for sure, but the likely explanation is this, and it has to do with the nature of the times. The ET presence manifests in a whole new level after the bombs are dropped in Hiroshima, 45, 46, and that is the beginning of the nuclear arms race, a whole new major threat to national security, world security. And at the time that Roswell happened, the U.S. government was already aware of what was happening. They knew about the Soviet access to both atom bomb secrets as well as the hydrogen bomb secrets. They had plenty of spies. They knew about Roswell as well. And so they knew exactly what was going to happen. Plus, they had German scientists. They had more German scientists than we did, I believe. They got more than paperclip. And so they were going to build missiles, they were going to build bombs, and they were going to put the bombs on top of the missiles. I mean, it was pretty clear. And the relationships between the West and the Soviet Union was virtually disintegrating right away. And so they knew it was coming. There were going to be another war, and it would be nuclear war, unless it could somehow be prevented. And so that is the situation they're looking at and knowing about at the point suddenly a vehicle crashes at Roswell and a press release goes out. And so, not surprisingly, their decision was, we're going to sit on this. We're going to see what we've got, what's going on, what are these entities, what kind of tech, and then decide what to do. Not unreasonable at all. Ultimately, they made the decision to contain it completely, and it is still contained to this day. So that's the reason the U.S. essentially. It makes it a national security policy. At the same time that they're making that decision, the world situation is this. All of the allied powers, which is all of them, except for the enemy, was pretty much all the rest of the world, were beholden to the United States as a major factor in defeating the Axis powers, as well as certainly going to be the most powerful economy in the world, and obviously the first nuclear force. And so we are the bulwark between them and any, quote, enemies, totalitarian states. And very soon it was developed that the two principal opponents were Soviet Union and Communist China. So the world is kind of well defined at that point. You've got these two communist powers, which are nuclear. China came later, but they're nuclear. You've got the West, which is the most powerful nuclear force and the biggest economy, as the bulwark between all the other nations. And so that is why they simply deferred to us on this. In other words, look, we're not going to undercut your policy on this. We're not going to try to grandstand and come out and say, oh, there's extraterrestrials here, because like you, we do not know what the effect that would have on this situation. Would it increase the probability of a mistake being made and nuclear weapons being launched? We're going to let you make the decision of when it's time to bring this forward. And so they simply went along with us for that reason. Did they know? Oh, of course they knew. So World War II and our position post-World War II is the reason why most of the world simply gone along with it. That leaves the Soviet Union and Communist China, two major powers, one now having 1.5 billion people. Why did they not preempt this? Why did they not come forward? And the only explanation that makes sense to me is this. These are totalitarian states. They are totalitarian states. Russia had a brief period there where it was moving away from that. They've gone back. Totalitarian states are based upon very single-minded leadership at the top and control of the public in a much higher degree than any of the nations that we're familiar with. Control, surveillance, and what have you. And so from the point of view of those leading the Soviet Union and China, Communist China, introducing a worldview-changing information like the presence of extraterrestrials was not going to help them maintain control of the population. It was going to undermine it, and therefore was not in their interest to do this. They wanted people to focus on the great leader, focus on the policies, stay in line, don't cause trouble, don't think outside the box. And so those two nations made the decision, we're not going to do it. Now, they could change their mind at any time. That is the best explanation why, at this time, after all these years, the United States is still in a position to end the truth embargo unless it foolishly delays until somebody else, in fact, does. And we'll see if that explanation holds up historically. So yeah, there's a fatigue, but it's okay. And one of the reasons that it won't work this time is, and another reason why the government continues to embarrass itself, is that people that get into these high rank and station positions, what they don't get is that this issue is literally being carried forward on a tidal wave of social media that didn't exist in 1969 or 79 or 89 or even 99. And so social media has absorbed this issue. Of course it has. Social media is global. My message to Chuck Schumer and Mark Warner and everybody on the Intel committee is that you've got a little bit of time. Those witnesses are ready to come to DC tomorrow. Take the oath and sit down. There's enough of them to fill up an entire week of hearings. And what they will testify to will virtually end this issue and allow the president to come forward. In a week, you have a little bit of time to do that. Timidity, cowardice, this is almost part of the political process now. Just being authentic and going and saying what you need to say, out of the question. And so they're factoring that. They go, well, it could cost the election. It could do this. It could do that. So my message to them is you have a limited amount of time to hold that hearing and set the president up. And if they did, they could prevent this from becoming a partisanized issue in the campaign that is coming, that is going to be, how can I put it, kind of somewhere between, Nightmare on Elm Street and Apocalypse Now. I don't know. But the fact is, it's late enough that if they held that hearing and to set the president up to come forward and confirm the ET presence, it's going to be viewed as partisan. It's going to be viewed as an effort by the Senate to help the current president win office, even though the bipartisan effort of the Senate Intel Committee, and they will conduct themselves in bipartisan way, without question, that will help. But ultimately, it's now late in the game. And so now they're thinking, well, it'll almost become partisan. Therefore, let's just wait and see what happens. I mean, this is the situation now. Well, what can I say? It's keeping me up at night.
Did you say you had a video you wanted to show us?
Yeah, I did. This recently happened. It's basically a representation of what's going on now, because it's one example of a number of things that are happening, but it is somewhat remarkable. And essentially, over the years, some very high level people have come forward and said there's an ET presence, right? In 2009, Edgar Mitchell did it at a press conference here that I held at the National Press Club. CNN was, it's on film. You can go see it. He says, yeah, there's an extraterrestrial presence here. Robert Bigelow went on 60 Minutes. And at the time that he had a very substantial contract with NASA, which eventually he lost, and told Laura Logan, there's an extraterrestrial presence here, right? And he said that. Okay. Gary Nolan, a Nobel Prize nominee in genetics, went on, I think, Fox News or News Nation and said there's an extraterrestrial presence here. And so it's kind of becoming amusing in a way, but they're not the president. But as we move closer to disclosure, you're going to see more of that. And this particular one is notable. The reason is that it was at a conference, a very high-level conference that's basically involving business and economics and so forth, where they have important speakers. This is the SALT event in New York. They invited David Grusch to speak. And at the last minute, he couldn't come. So they got a substitute. And the substitute they got was a gentleman by the name of Colonel Karl Nell, who has a substantial background. And so he goes on the show. And so I want to quickly play. It's not very long. And then I'll comment on it.
So I was fortunate. I had a 4-year ROTC scholarship to Penn. I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. The Army sent me overseas to do signal corps engineering projects. So I did a lot of strategic comm projects in Europe. I ended up working in Army Space Command. I commanded a satellite ground station, war trace to the Joint Chiefs. I spent some time at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The Army ultimately sent me to get a master's in mechanical engineering, a master's in strategic studies, graduate work in computer science. And my last assignment was involved with the UAP task force, which maybe is the most apropos for this discussion.
And so, Karl, here's the $1 million question. Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt. And so there's sort of two tracks here. One is from first principles, and another is actually from the data. So let's take a look at the data. So we can look at some folks that have very high-level access to information, like Paul Hellyer, who is the defense chief for Canada, has come out and said the same thing. We can look at Ham Eshed, the head of Israel's, or the former head of Israel's Space Force, has said the same thing. Chris Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intel, SAPCO, has essentially said the same thing. Lou Elizondo has said the same thing. David Grusch has said the same thing. David Grusch cleared for presidentially level material. So you're looking at people that are in a position to know this, and they're telling you the same thing. You could take a look at the Gang of Eight in the Senate and in Congress. So there's 2 members of the Gang of Eight, Marco Rubio and Senator Chuck Schumer, that signed up to the UAP Disclosure Amendment last year that basically said they're not being told the truth and we need to push forward on that. There's billions of stars in the galaxy. Life here evolved in 500 million years, which is basically a blink of an eye. We've found planets around every star that we've looked at. It's likely that the universe is full of life. If you look at the SETI program in particular, the SETI program has all the same assumptions that you would accept and probably make with respect to this topic, except that they believe that non-human intelligence is transmitting signals here. But at the same time, like, we're not transmitting signals. SETI doesn't transmit signals, and the only signals that are actually broadcast of high enough power into space for somebody to pick up come from broadcast television and ballistic missile early warning systems, which you could argue our technology is moving away from. We're going to satellite, we're going to fiber. Broadcast TV is a thing of the past. And if you get to some state where society is stable, maybe we don't need ballistic missile early warning systems. So the other guy is probably not going to transmit. But what the other guy may do is come here if that's possible to do. And there's physics models that suggest that may be possible.
What is very interesting about this interview, first, that question was planned. It was going to be asked. He knew it, and he knew what his response was going to be. It wasn't a question of him sitting down to have a chat with somebody at the SALT conference and answer some questions. No, that was set up. The second thing was, when he interviewed him, he's saying, why don't you give us something about your background so the audience would care about what you have to say. And then he goes through and literally goes through his background in some detail. This doesn't happen. You never see this. Nobody comes on an interview and then just goes through their resume like that. The interviewer might give a little background. Person did this, person did that, and there you go. Or they might just say something, well, I was involved in this. But to kind of just literally go through it chronologically like that is very unusual. Why did he do that? He did it for the reason that gentleman gave. Why should people care what you say? Because obviously he's going to say something important. And so he runs through his entire resume, all right? And then he's asked the question about what is the basis by which you think that this is real, that there is this extraterrestrial presence or non-human presence. And he just lists the reasons, ba-bing, ba-bam, ba-bam. It's like a cadence right here. And so that was Colonel Karl Nell going on at a very important conference, New York. That's not a UAP event. This is a conference associated with finance and other matters, but has a range of speakers and basically telling the world David Grusch was telling the truth. And so, again, this is where we are now. That was just about a couple of weeks ago. Who will be next? Don't know. But we are at a critical juncture right now. To get back to something else you said, Tara, before, the why. Everybody likes to think that their time is the most profound time, and absolute stuff has to happen, and whatever, the world's going to end. I get it, but I have strong belief, and I'm not alone in this, that we are at an inflection point on this planet. We have pushed the limits of the environment. We have pushed the limits of our war capability. We have pushed the limits of our population to 8 billion, and things are starting to fall apart. And we have absolute confirmation, which, by the way, we just brought up in the Congress the other day. Tim Burchett was talking in Congress, I think at some hearing, and brought up the issue of our nukes being shut off. Good old Tim. I mean, he's relentless. He is never going to give up. So that just came up in Congress. Yeah, they have shut down our nukes on a number of occasions. They turn them off. We turn them back on. They did it in the Soviet Union. The risk of nuclear war greater than ever. ETs flying craft down over ICBM sites, turning off all the missiles, which is technically impossible. These are not unconnected events. These are existential times. There's always been a certain existentiality regarding the human condition. I get it. But never has it been this global, this large, this potentially imminent. And so we got to do something. And when you look at the circumstances globally, the stuff that's being done is not the right stuff. We need to do something, but not that, except disclosure. It's a simple concept, disclosure. Now, it is a simple announcement, but it's the most significant announcement of all time. Because while a lot of people know they can't act, while governments may know they are unable to act, they can't react, they can't deal with it and utilize it for change. As long as it's not true, you can't utilize something that you don't even acknowledge exists. And so confirming the extraterrestrial presence is a worldview changing paradigm shift of unprecedented proportion that will open up doors that are not there. Another way of thinking about it is this. Most people are familiar with scientific paradigm shifts, and relativity is one of them. There have been others. And what a scientific paradigm shift is like is this. Most people kind of know this. Suddenly you make a leap forward in understanding aspects of the physical world to a place that's very substantial, very impacting, that you weren't there. It's just boom, there you are. Okay, great. And now you've established a new understanding. And this paradigm shift then makes it possible to go back and examine a plethora of other scientific issues you could not resolve. And underneath this new understanding of the physical world, you start solving them. And that advances things forward. The paradigm shift we're referring to is not a paradigm shift in science per se, though there's some science involved and we may learn some extraordinary science. It is a paradigm shift in worldview, a paradigm shift in the worldview of human beings, from the most basic citizens right up to the most powerful leaders, that nothing else can achieve. It allows a worldview change in virtually the entire population, which is beyond anything that has ever happened in this planet. And not only that, in a very short amount of time. It's not going to take hundreds of years like Christianity did. It changed worldviews, took hundreds of years, thousands of years, had a lot of followers. This happens overnight, a week. Right. So in that sense, it's utterly profound. And that new worldview is going to allow people and leaders and others to then double back and start addressing problems that are currently intractable, that under the current worldview we can't solve. We can't deal with them. We can't fix anything. Suddenly, we figure out how to fix them. And thus we get out of this dilemma that we're in. And so that is why it's so important.
Well, I personally am excited for that post-disclosure world, or I'm going to say the post-confirmation world. And you've been very kind to spend so much time with us today, Steve, and you're just full of important information, which we very much appreciate. And I know this is a life's work for you. So I know humanity will eventually appreciate it as well when they finally know the truth. So do you have any final messages, Steve, that you can leave us with? And also the exact date of disclosure would be nice too, please. Thank you.
Oh, there
just
are people out there.
A little ask,
that.
a small one.
You want to get some views or whatever, just come up with a date.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, it has to be.
Steve Bassett said disclosure will be on this date.
Yeah. And hopefully it actually comes psychically from an extraterrestrial, operating from whatever. No, I can't do that. But here's what I can do. Promo time. Let's do some promos. Okay. First of all, one of the things that's happening now, which is totally appropriate and more indicative of why we are ultimately going to get this pretty soon, is that substantial organizations are forming specifically to deal with the post-disclosure world. Not surprisingly, they're nonprofits, 501c3s or 501c4s, and they're not trivial. Right. And the ability to get money is improving every day as more and more people with money are going, oh, this is important. This is real. I need to help this because, philanthropy is huge in this world, particularly in the United States. And billions of dollars get put into some wonderful things, but not this. The truth embargo has minimized the ability of people to go, I want to help here. But that's getting better. And just in the last year, the New Paradigm Institute, a think tank chaired by Danny Sheehan, who has wanted to put this together for years, is finally put it together. And so the website is newparadigminstitute.org. It already has a substantial board of advisors. It has lawyers working with it. It's doing a lot of projects. It's raised a substantial amount of money, but it's going to raise millions more. It's holding fundraisers right now. So, and while some of what it's doing could impact, and hopefully will impact, getting disclosure done, its fundamental mission is clearly post-disclosure, where we're going to need a lot of think tanks like that. And so that's done. Meanwhile, Gary Nolan has shepherded the creation of two entities, again, nonprofits. One is the Soul Foundation. This is a think tank, essentially scientific-based think tank, based in, again, I think in the Bay Area. And then recently, they just announced another entity. I think Gary Nolan's involved in this. And they have a substantial board involved. And this is called the UAP Disclosure Fund. To some degree, that's big D disclosure fund, meaning I think this is political. This is a political 501c3, which can do certain things. And they're probably going to be doing some things to help advance towards disclosure, capital D. But I assure you, the political engagements and political issues that will emerge post-disclosure are going to be large. And so the UAP Disclosure Fund, I'm sure, is going to be raising money to deal with those post-disclosure. The Paradigm Research Group is my entity, which has always been a sole proprietorship to make it exempt from government interference, is now going nonprofit. It is a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., and I'm about to submit the 501c3 application. It'll be small, but able to move quickly. It will be based in the National Press Building. I will have a board of advisors. And so for the first time, and I haven't really gone out yet, I'm about to put up a GoFundMe, Paradigm Research Group can receive tax-deductible funding. And hopefully that's going to give me a little more leverage and ability to maneuver. New Paradigm Institute's huge. I'm small. My office, though, is right next to the White House, and his New Paradigm Institute's Washington office is right next to the Capitol. And so we got a little thing going here. So that is happening. All right. The Hollywood Disclosure Alliance was founded by myself and longtime Hollywood publicist, Dan Harari. We launched that in November of last year, and it is also created for the post-disclosure world. Not that what it's doing may have some impact on the disclosure process now, but it is basically a post-disclosure entity. And let me also promote the Contact in the Desert conference, which was just held, is its 10th anniversary. It was significant. The energy level was extraordinary. The disclosure issues were all over. And it is perhaps now the premier conference in the United States. Embrace the post-disclosure world, I can assure you, in a big way. And it will be held, obviously, next May, June. And so I invite people to check out that contactinthedesert.com. Probably very soon they're going to put up a flash page with the exact dates for next year. Nevertheless, Contact in the Desert continues, and it is a significant event. I'm proud to be attached to that. I invite people to spread the word, share on social media accounts, share the links to these entities, and give people the opportunity to participate and support this. Our community, which includes all the podcasters like yourselves, which are legion now, right? All the researchers, all the witnesses, the contactees that are going to be coming forward in droves, I assure you. They're going to be coming forward in droves. They're already getting out there, but nothing like once disclosure comes. We are going to very significantly shepherd in the new world. People are going to pay attention to us. They're going to want to know what we think. They're going to read our books. They're going to watch our documentaries. They're going to listen to the contactee accounts. And we are going to be significant shepherds of the new world. And so this is an extraordinary opportunity for us, but also a powerful and demanding obligation, which I hope people will step into. The fact that it fell on us is luck of the draw. There have been hundreds of generations in the history of the human race, going back approximately 300,000 years. And it just landed in our lap. And I'm glad that I've lived long enough to be able to participate, hopefully, in the post-disclosure world. Others are going to spend many years there. They may end up on Mars with Elon Musk. They may actually end up seeing other stars, because I happen to believe star-to-star travel is possible, and the ETs have said so in a number of cases. So I leave everyone with that, and don't hesitate to get in touch. My contact information is on my website. Also, please subscribe to my updates list, which is right up there in the upper left corner. And I will send you free information from time to time.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that, Steve. And as those whistleblowers come forward, please tell them to reach out to us because we want to talk to them.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I love the high-level overview that you offered to us, and then you give us a better understanding of where we are with disclosure as it relates to the government. So we really appreciate that. And we just very much appreciate all that you're doing to diligently work towards bringing disclosure formally to the public, bringing this information. I know it's a lot of work, so we do appreciate all that you do for that. And anyone that does want to learn more about Project Shift or the Paradigm Research Group, we'll go ahead and include his links in the description below. You can go ahead to his website. And Steve, it's just been such a pleasure. We really appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much for everything that you do for us and for the time that you spent with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. It was fun.
Hi, Steve.